assessment statement is state the 3 parts to the cell theory. Alright, so the first one is all living things are made of cells. To have better terminology, you can put organisms. Two, cells are the smallest unit of life, and cells come from pre-existing cells. Now we're going to get into the support on why this is true.
Alright, so then we're going to look at support for the cell theory. So there's two main reasons why the cell theory is what it is today. So when we look at the first main reason for why the cell theory is like, because we look at microscopes, we actually see the cells themselves dividing. So we can actually, with microscopes, we can actually see the cells undergoing mitosis. So that's going to support the cells come from pre-existing cells, because also the next point, we look at spontaneous generation. Alright, so spontaneous generation, essentially Louis Pasteur, he had a flask that had some fluid in it, and he had it open just to test this. So he tested it. So over time, that flask with that fluid in it, that liquid, that broth, the broth, it got a bunch of bacteria, a bunch of different organisms living inside it. So then he said, so the next trial he did is that he had that same flask with the same broth and he closed it, and over time nothing grew. So that was concrete evidence that spontaneous generation, it doesn't occur. That all cells must come from pre-existing cells. And then we can look at exceptions. So there's not a lot of space.
You can just read
There's 3 exceptions that go towards the cell theory. The first one is viruses, the second one is the first cell getting come from another cell, and the last one is mitochondria and chloroplasts. Enrique will be going over the third one, while I'll be going over the first 2. The first one will be explaining is viruses. The reason why viruses is an exception to the cell theory, specifically the third one, all cells come from pre-existing cells, is because viruses is just a protein with DNA. They don't go through mitosis, so they can't replicate each other, and they don't use energy at all to build anything. So they have to go to host cells. So these cells will be multicellular cells. So they attack these cells so they can replicate and build things off of this cell. So we don't technically know if viruses are alive. We kind of consider them non-living, but the way they replicate and build and are effective is due to them attacking other cells. Now for the second one, the first cell getting come from another cell, the reason why this is an exception, specifically again, all cells come from pre-existing cells, is because we don't know where the first cell came from. We just know that there's a cell to produce other cells. This is obviously an exception because all cells come from pre-existing cells, but in this case, it doesn't. So Enrique would be explaining the mitochondria and chloroplast one, so I'll just pass it to him.
Alright, so when we're looking at mitochondria and chloroplasts, we're going to look at, so you can think about the endosymbiotic theory. So we can look at, so basically you can imagine that So mitochondria and chloroplasts in eukaryotes have their own genetic materials. They have their own DNA. They both have double phospholipid. They both have what the fuck? So mitochondria and chloroplasts both have genetic material. Essentially they have their own genome inside, and the nucleus is something separate. Mitochondria and chloroplasts also have their own phospholipid bilayers, and that they can divide within the cell by themselves. So essentially, this symbiotic theory, you can imagine that sometime ancient time, bigger prokaryote, he saw like a mitochondria. The mitochondria was probably its own prokaryote back in that time. So a bigger one, he ingested him, and then that symbiotic theory, like that a bigger prokaryote ingested these two, and natural selection favored the prokaryotes that had these two. So then those are the cells that we know to be today. And that's why these are also an exception to the rule, because likely that these come from different. So mitochondria and chloroplasts are exceptions to the rule, to the cell theory, because they have their own genetic information, they have their own double membrane, they have their own genome essentially, that they can essentially divide within the eukaryote by themselves. Like for example, the mitochondrial DNA, the genome will go directly from the mother to the offspring, and these were the exceptions to the rule.